The 17th of January, 1943. 32,000 feet above the Ruhr Valley. The air is thin and cold, cold enough to freeze the moisture in a man's breath before it leaves his lungs. Major Heinrich Müller banks his Messerschmitt Bf 109 G6 into a gentle turn, his gloved hand steady on the stick. Below him, the industrial heartland of the Third Reich spreads out like a grey tapestry smoke from the Krupp factories rising in lazy columns, the frozen Rhine cutting a silver line through snow-dusted fields. The cockpit smells of oil, leather, and the faint metallic tang of oxygen from his mask. Müller has been flying these skies for 3 years. He knows every thermal current over Essen, every landmark between Düsseldorf and Cologne. He has 23 victories painted on his fuselage, each one a testament to skill honed over hundreds of combat hours. On this particular morning, the radar stations have reported a formation of American bombers approaching from the west, another daylight raid, another opportunity to defend the fatherland. Müller expects what he has always encountered: lumbering B-17 seconds escorted by nimble but short-ranged P-38 seconds, or the occasional Spitfire that has strayed too far from England. He adjusts his throttle, checks his ammunition counter, 200 rounds per cannon, enough for perhaps 10 good bursts, and begins his climb to intercept altitude. What Heinrich Müller does not know, cannot know, is that the rules of aerial combat are about to be rewritten by a machine that will fundamentally challenge everything the Luftwaffe has understood about American fighter design. The sound reaches him first. Not the familiar high whine of Allison engines or the distinctive purr of Merlin power plants, but something deeper, more guttural, a mechanical roar that seems to shake the very fabric of the sky. Müller's eyes scan the horizon, and then he sees them. 8 aircraft approaching in loose formation, their silhouettes unlike anything he has encountered before. They are massive for single-engine fighters, almost brutishly proportioned, with broad wings and fuselages that seem too thick, too heavy to belong in the realm of aerial combat. They bear the white star of the United States Army Air Forces, but they move with a purpose and confidence that makes Müller's grip tighten on his control stick. These are Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, the first wave of an aircraft that will force German fighter pilots to recalculate every assumption they have made about American industrial capacity, engineering philosophy, and the very nature of air superiority. As Müller pushes his throttle forward to engage, he performs the mental calculus that every experienced pilot conducts before combat. Assess the enemy's weaknesses, exploit them quickly, disengage before fuel runs critical. The Americans, he has learned, build fighters that are fast in a straight line but heavy in a turn. They are reluctant to engage in close-quarters combat. They run when pressed. This has been the pattern for 2 years, and Müller has no reason to expect anything different today. He angles his Messerschmitt into an attack position, picking out the nearest Thunderbolt as his target, and begins his diving approach. What Heinrich Müller is about to discover is not merely a new aircraft, but a manifestation of a philosophical divide so profound that it will reshape his understanding of warfare itself. The P-47 Thunderbolt is not simply a fighter plane. It is a flying embodiment of American industrial abundance, a machine born from a nation that has chosen to solve the problem of aerial combat, not through elegant efficiency or graceful design, but through overwhelming application of resources, firepower, and sheer mechanical intimidation. Where German engineers have spent the war years refining, streamlining, extracting maximum performance from minimum materials, their American counterparts have taken the opposite approach. If a problem exists, solve it by adding more armor, more guns, more ammunition, more engine, more fuel. The Thunderbolt weighs nearly 8 tons, fully loaded, almost twice the weight of the Messerschmitt that now dives toward it. Its Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine produces 2,000 horsepower, driving a 13-foot propeller through air that grows thinner with each 1,000 feet of altitude. But it is the armament that represents the true shock, the genuine revolution. 8 Browning M2, 50 caliber machine guns, 4 mounted in each wing, with a combined ammunition load of 3,400 rounds. When all 8 guns fire simultaneously, the P-47 unleashes 100 rounds per second, a volume of fire that exceeds most ground-based anti-aircraft batteries, a sustained mechanical violence that belongs more properly to naval warfare than to aerial combat. Müller closes to 400 meters, his gun sight settling on the nearest Thunderbolt's cockpit. He has perhaps 3 seconds of firing time in this diving pass, enough for a good burst from his 20mm cannons and his nose-mounted machine guns. His finger begins to tighten on the trigger, and in that instant, the American pilot does something unexpected. Instead of breaking away or attempting evasive maneuvers, the Thunderbolt simply rolls inverted and points its nose directly at the attacking Messerschmitt. For a fraction of a second, Müller sees the distinctive intake beneath the American fighter's nose, the broad ellipse of its cowling, and then the wings begin to sparkle with muzzle flashes. The sound that follows is not the familiar chatter of machine gun fire, but something closer to industrial machinery, a sustained mechanical roar like a foundry stamping press running at full speed. Tracer rounds fill the space between the two aircraft with such density that they seem almost solid, a luminous tunnel of copper-jacketed steel reaching across the sky at 2,800 feet per second. Müller instinctively breaks left, abandoning his attack run, his mind struggling to process what he has just witnessed. In that 3-second burst, the P-47 has fired more ammunition than Müller carries for his entire mission. The American is still shooting as Müller pulls hard into his evasive turn, the tracers following him with a persistence that speaks not of careful ammunition conservation but of almost profligate abundance. To understand the shock that courses through Heinrich Müller's nervous system in this moment, one must understand the context in which German fighter pilots have been operating for the past 4 years. Since the beginning of the war, Luftwaffe doctrine has emphasized the concept of the energy fighter aircraft designed to gain altitude quickly, dive on enemy formations, deliver a concentrated burst of fire, and then climb away to safety, using superior speed and climb rate. German fighters carry relatively modest ammunition loads because their tactics demand precision, not sustained fire. A Bf-109 pilot is trained to close within 200 meters, fire a 2-second burst, and break away. This is not merely tactical preference, it is necessity dictated by material reality. Germany is a nation under blockade, cut off from natural rubber, petroleum, certain critical metals. Every round of ammunition represents refined materials that could be used elsewhere in the war economy. Every kilogram of weight carried aloft is fuel that could have powered another sortie, another mission. German engineering excellence has been channeled into extracting maximum performance from minimum resources, creating aircraft that are light, nimble, deadly in the hands of experienced pilots, but fundamentally constrained by the scarcity that defines the Axis war effort. The P-47 Thunderbolt represents the opposite end of this philosophical spectrum. It is a machine conceived and built by a nation that in 1943 produces more steel in a single month than Germany produces in an entire year. A nation where petroleum refineries work at such capacity that aviation fuel is measured not in litres but in millions of gallons. A nation where the limitation on military production is not materials, but the speed at which factories can be built and workers can be trained. The Thunderbolt's 8 machine guns are not the result of gradual escalation or tactical necessity. They are the product of a simple engineering decision. If 6 guns provide effective firepower, 8 will provide overwhelming firepower, and the additional weight can be compensated for by installing a larger engine, accepting a larger airframe, adding more fuel capacity to maintain range. This is not elegant engineering in the European sense. It is the application of industrial logic to aerial combat, the transformation of the fighter aircraft from a weapon of precision into a weapon of annihilation. Each 50 caliber machine gun fires 800 rounds per minute, but in practical combat terms, what matters is that a 1-second burst from all 8 guns delivers 133 rounds into a cone of space, approximately 50 feet in diameter, at 300 yards distance. For comparison, a German 88mm flak gun, the most feared anti-aircraft weapon in the world, fires between 15 and 20 rounds per minute. A single P-47, for the duration of its ammunition supply, can exceed the firepower of 4 88mm flak guns. Muller climbs back to altitude, his heart still racing from the encounter. Around him, his wingman and the other members of his staffel are reporting similar experiences over the radio encounters with the massive American fighters that refuse to run, that absorb damage that would cripple a Messerschmitt or a Focke-Wulf, that keep shooting long after any rational pilot should have exhausted his ammunition. One pilot reports putting cannon shells into a Thunderbolt's fuselage and watching the Americans simply continue flying, apparently unbothered by damage that would have sent a Bf-109 spiraling to Earth. Another describes being pursued in a diving attack and hearing the distinctive crack, crack, crack of 50 caliber rounds passing through his aircraft's empennage. A sustained fire that lasted for what felt like 10 seconds, an eternity in aerial combat, an impossibly long burst by Luftwaffe standards. The radio chatter carries a note of confusion, even disbelief. These Americans are fighting in a manner that violates the understood rules of aerial combat, using ammunition like men who expect an infinite supply, absorbing punishment like machines built by people who believe that any engineering problem can be solved by adding more metal. And most disturbing of all, they are doing it at altitudes where the Luftwaffe has long held unchallenged superiority, where the thin air robs engines of power and makes every maneuver a battle against physics itself. The P-47's effectiveness at high altitude is itself a revelation that contradicts German assumptions about American engineering capabilities. For 2 years, Luftwaffe intelligence has operated on the assessment that American aircraft designers prioritize low-altitude performance, that their fighters are optimized for ground attack and close air support, that they lack the sophisticated supercharger technology necessary for high-altitude interception. The Thunderbolt shatters this assumption through brute force engineering. Its turbo supercharger, a massive mechanical system that alone weighs nearly 500 pounds, feeds compressed air to the R2000 800 engine with such efficiency that the aircraft actually gains performance as it climbs. At 30,000 feet, where a Bf-109's engine is gasping for oxygen and delivering perhaps 70% of its rated power, the P-47's double wasp is still producing over 1,500 horsepower, driving the 7-ton fighter at speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour. German pilots discover this the hard way, attempting to escape by climbing the traditional defense against a heavier opponent, only to find the Thunderbolt not only matching their climb rate but exceeding it, all while maintaining enough excess power to continue firing those 8 machine guns in sustained bursts that seem to never end. In the weeks following that first encounter over the Ruhr, the Luftwaffe begins to compile reports, to analyze gun camera footage, to interview pilots who have survived engagements with the P-47. The picture that emerges is both technically impressive and psychologically unsettling. The Thunderbolt's ammunition load allows for approximately 30 seconds of sustained fire from all 8 guns, 30 seconds in which 4,000 rounds leave the aircraft at a combined muzzle energy that exceeds 12,000 foot-pounds per second. For context, German pilots are trained to fire in bursts of no more than 2 seconds. Their aircraft carry enough ammunition for perhaps 15 such bursts before guns fall silent. The American pilot, by contrast, can hold his trigger down for a full 2 seconds, delivering 266 rounds in that time, and still have enough ammunition remaining for 14 more identical bursts. Or he can fire single gun bursts, rationing his ammunition across all 8 weapons to extend his combat effectiveness to several minutes of intermittent fire. This fundamentally changes the calculus of aerial combat. A German pilot must close to killing range, fire precisely, and disengage. An American pilot in a P-47 can begin firing at 800 yards beyond effective range, simply saturating the sky with lead and continue firing as he closes, creating a moving wall of bullets through which the enemy must fly. It is not marksmanship. It is industrial application of violence. The armor is the second revelation. Luftwaffe pilots have long understood that American aircraft include armor protection, engine firewalls, armored seats, windscreen glass thick enough to stop rifle-caliber rounds. But the P-47 takes this to an unprecedented extreme. The pilot sits in a bathtub of half-inch armor plate that weighs nearly 200 pounds. The engine is surrounded by protective cowling that can absorb 20mm cannon strikes. The fuel tanks are self-sealing and located behind the pilot, with the massive radial engine serving as an additional 1,300 pounds of bulletproof mass between the pilot and frontal attacks. German pilots report putting cannon shells into Thunderbolts at angles that should produce catastrophic damage, strikes that would tear the wing from a Messerschmitt or ignite the fuel tanks of a Spitfire, and watching the American aircraft. Simply shudder, perhaps trail smoke, and continue fighting. In one documented incident from March 1943, a P-47 piloted by Lieutenant Robert Johnson absorbs over 200 hits from machine gun and cannon fire during a running battle with a Focke-Wulf W-190, including direct cannon strikes to the fuselage and cockpit. Johnson lands the aircraft at his base in England. The ground crew counts the holes, photographs the damage, and sends the aircraft back to the maintenance depot. Within 3 days, the Thunderbolt is flying combat missions again. This is not merely good engineering. It is engineering backed by resources so vast that the loss of individual aircraft is treated as an acceptable cost, that battle damage is viewed not as a reason to retire an airframe, but as an opportunity to repair and return it to service. For German aces like Heinrich Müller, men who have survived years of combat through a combination of skill, situational awareness, and precise ammunition management, the P-47 represents a profoundly demoralizing development. It is not that the American pilots are necessarily more skilled. In fact, many of the early P-47 pilots are recently trained, with perhaps 200 hours of flight time compared to Müller's 1,500 hours. It is not that the Thunderbolt is more maneuverable at low speeds and low altitudes. A well-flown Bf-109 can still outturn it. What is demoralizing is the sheer abundance on display, the casual wastefulness that speaks to industrial capacity beyond German comprehension. An American pilot can afford to fire 500 rounds to achieve a kill that a German pilot must accomplish with 50 rounds. An American squadron can afford to lose 2 or 3 aircraft in a mission and have them replaced within days. An American aircraft can absorb damage that would constitute a total loss in the Luftwaffe and be back in service within a week. This is not a tactical advantage. It is a strategic reality that no amount of German skill or courage can overcome. The 50 caliber round itself becomes a source of grim fascination among Luftwaffe pilots. The 7x99 mm cartridge that feeds the Browning M2 is not particularly sophisticated. By 1943 standards, it is a scaled-up rifle cartridge, lacking the explosive payload of German 20mm cannon shells or the armor-piercing capabilities of Japanese 30mm rounds. What it possesses is consistency, reliability, and sufficient mass and velocity to cause devastating damage through sheer kinetic energy. A 50 caliber bullet weighs approximately 1.6 ounces and leaves the muzzle at 2,900 feet per second. When it strikes an aircraft's aluminum skin at typical combat ranges, it punches through with enough energy remaining to damage internal structures, sever control cables, rupture fuel lines, or wound the pilot. More importantly, the 50 caliber round is produced by American industry in quantities that beggar belief by mid-1943. American factories are manufacturing over 40 million rounds per month, enough to load out every P-47 inches the European theatre 3 times over. German pilots begin to report a phenomenon they call the tracer swarm, the visual effect created when a Thunderbolt fires a sustained burst with every 5th round being a tracer. At night, or against dark cloud backgrounds, it appears as though the American fighter is shooting a solid stream of fire, a continuous beam of destruction that seems less like conventional weapons fire and more like something from a science fiction novel. The psychological impact of encountering this level of firepower cannot be understated. Luftwaffe fighter pilots in 1943 are among the most experienced combat aviators in the world. Many have been flying combat missions since the invasion of Poland in 1939, have survived the Battle of Britain, the campaigns in North Africa and Russia, have accumulated victory totals that dwarf those of their Allied counterparts. They are accustomed to tactical superiority, to the confidence that comes from flying aircraft designed by the world's foremost aeronautical engineers, to the knowledge that their skills have been honed in an unforgiving crucible where only the exceptional survive. The P-47 challenges this psychological dominance not through superior performance in traditional metrics, speed, climb rate, turning ability, but through a different kind of superiority. The superiority of abundance over scarcity, of volume over precision, of industrial capacity over tactical elegance. German pilots find themselves instinctively conserving ammunition even in desperate situations, calculating whether they have enough rounds left for the flight home, while their American opponents spray the sky with such profligacy that it seems almost obscene. This is not merely a difference in tactics, it is a difference in worldview, a clash between an ancient European culture of careful husbandry and resource management and a young American culture of expansion, abundance, and the belief that any problem can be solved by applying more of everything. By summer of 1943, the Luftwaffe's training programs begin incorporating specific guidance for combating the P-47. Instructors emphasize the importance of frontal attacks approaching from 12 o'clock high, firing a single precise burst, and disengaging before the American can bring his guns to bear. They teach students to exploit the Thunderbolt's relatively poor low-speed handling to drag the American into turning fights below 10,000 feet where the massive fighter becomes sluggish and predictable. They warn against pursuing a damaged P-47, as the aircraft's armor allows it to serve as bait for over-eager German pilots who find themselves drawn into traps where other Thunderbolts are waiting. But underlying all this tactical instruction is an unspoken acknowledgement that the war in the air has fundamentally changed, that the Luftwaffe is now facing opponents who can afford to make mistakes, to waste ammunition, to lose aircraft and pilots, and have them replaced faster than they can be shot down. German industry in 1943 produces approximately 25,000 aircraft of all types. American industry in the same year produces 85,000 aircraft. Of the P-47 Thunderbolt specifically, Republic Aviation builds 12,602 examples in 1943 alone, more than the entire annual production of BF, 109 seconds, FW 190 seconds, and all other German fighter types combined. There is a particular incident, documented in both German and American records, that illustrates the psychological gulf that the P-47 creates. In August 1943, a staffel of 9 BF 109 seconds intercepts a flight of 4 P-47 seconds escorting a reconnaissance aircraft over occupied France. The German formation has both numerical and positional advantage. They are 5,000 feet above the Americans and have the sun at their backs. The engagement should be straightforward: a diving attack, a quick kill, disengagement before Allied reinforcements arrive. But the lead American pilot, Captain David Schilling, does not behave according to the expected pattern. Instead of breaking away or calling for help, Schilling simply reverses course and flies directly toward the attacking Germans, his wingmen following in loose formation. What happens next is described by one of the German pilots in his after-action report as unlike any previous combat experience. The 4 P-47 seconds fly directly through the German formation, all 32 machine guns firing continuously, saturating the airspace with such a density of 50 caliber rounds that the German pilots instinctively scatter, breaking formation to avoid the tracer swarm. In the confusion, 2 BF 109 seconds collide a glancing contact that tears the wing from one aircraft and sends both spiraling to Earth. A third is hit by the concentrated fire from two P-47 seconds and explodes. Schilling's flight, having expended perhaps half their ammunition in this single head-on pass, reforms and continues escorting their reconnaissance aircraft. The remaining 6 German fighters do not pursue. They return to base, where the pilot's reports are initially disbelieved by their commanding officer. How could 4 enemy aircraft rout 9 of Germany's finest fighters? But the gun camera footage confirms the story, and more importantly, confirms something that German intelligence has been reluctant to accept: that American fighter pilots are no longer fighting defensively, no longer prioritizing survival over aggression, but are actively seeking combat, with a confidence born from knowing they possess material advantages that German pilots can never match. The sound of 8 .50 caliber machine guns firing in unison becomes, for Luftwaffe pilots, a kind of auditory signature that triggers immediate physiological responses. Elevated heart rate, tunnel vision, the instinct to break away and seek cover. This is remarkable considering that these are men who have endured years of combat, who have been strafed by enemy fighters, pursued by anti-aircraft fire, forced to bail out of burning aircraft. But there is something uniquely unnerving about the sustained, mechanical roar of the P-47's armament, a sound that seems to belong more to ground warfare than to aerial combat, that carries within it the implicit message: we have so much ammunition that we can afford to waste it trying to kill you. German pilots begin to develop unofficial rules of engagement: never attack a P-47 that has spotted you, never pursue one into a dive, never assume that sustained fire means the American is low on ammunition. These rules represent a fundamental inversion of the predator-prey relationship that has defined aerial combat since 1914. The Luftwaffe, which has controlled European airspace for 3 years, is now fighting defensively, calculating survival odds before engaging, choosing to disengage from combats that 6 months earlier they would have pressed aggressively. The recurring symbol in all these encounters, the detail that appears again and again in German reports and pilot accounts, is ammunition, or more precisely, the visible evidence of its expenditure. Empty. 50 caliber casings rain down from P-47 seconds in such quantities that ground observers sometimes mistake them for defensive chaff. The tracer trails linger in the thin, high-altitude air, creating geometric patterns that are visible for miles. Thunderbolts return to base with their ammunition bays completely empty, having fired every single round during the mission, a practice that would be considered reckless incompetence in the Luftwaffe, but is treated as acceptable combat expenditure in the US Army Air Forces. The P-47's ammunition drums are marked with inspection stamps, manufacturer codes, lot numbers, bureaucratic details that speak to an industrial system so vast and well organized that it tracks individual batches of bullets through a supply chain spanning continents. German pilots who inspect captured P-47 wreckage report finding ammunition manufactured at multiple locations: Lake City, Kings Mill, Denver. Ordnance dates of production often only weeks before the aircraft was shot down. This is the detail that perhaps haunts Luftwaffe intelligence officers most: that the Americans are fighting with ammunition so fresh that it still carries the oil from the manufacturing process, that the supply chain from factory floor to combat expenditure is measured in days rather than months. By the winter of 1943, Heinrich Müller has 36 victories. He is an Oberleutnant now, a holder of the German Cross in gold, a veteran of 1,000 combat hours. He has learned to fight the P-47 seconds with the same careful precision he brings to all aerial combat, choosing his moments, firing only when he has a perfect shot, disengaging the instant the tactical advantage shifts. But he has also learned something more profound and more disturbing: that skill and experience have limits, that there are advantages which cannot be overcome through individual excellence. He watches newer pilots arrive at his staffel, young men with barely 100 hours of flight time, and sees in their eyes the same confidence he once possessed, the same belief that German engineering and German training create an inherent superiority. He knows that many of them will die in their first 10 missions, shot down by American pilots with less skill but infinitely more resources, pilots who can afford to make 3 mistakes for every one the German makes and still emerge victorious. This knowledge sits in Müller's chest like a weight, a growing certainty that the war in the air is no longer about tactics or courage or individual achievement, but about mathematics, about production figures, about which nation can build more aircraft and train more pilots and deliver more ammunition to the front faster than the other side can destroy them. The transformation in Luftwaffe combat doctrine that occurs throughout 1943 and early 1944 is, at its core, a transformation in perception. German fighter pilots begin the war, believing they are the world's elite airmen, flying the world's finest aircraft, defending a nation whose technological and tactical superiority will ultimately prevail despite numerical disadvantages. They end 1943, still believing in their own skill that has been proven too many times to doubt, but no longer believing in ultimate victory, no longer able to ignore the material reality that manifests itself most visibly in the P-47 Thunderbolts' 8 machine guns. Those guns, with their 3,400-round ammunition load, their sustained 100 round per second fire rate, their casual expenditure of resources that Germany can no longer afford, become a symbol for the entire Allied war effort. Overwhelming, relentless, impossible to defeat through individual excellence, because it is not individual excellence that is being deployed against them, but industrial capacity so vast that it reduces tactical considerations to irrelevance. There is a particular quality to the damage pattern left by 50 caliber fire that becomes grimly familiar to Luftwaffe maintenance crews. Unlike cannon shells, which create large explosive holes and obvious structural failures, 50 caliber rounds punch clean perforations, half-inch diameter holes that appear in clusters, stitching across wing surfaces or fuselages in lines that show where the American pilot walked his fire across the target. German aircraft that survive encounters with P-47 seconds return to base, looking as though they have been worked over by a precise but thorough drill press, dozens or even hundreds of holes, each one representing a 1.6-ounce projectile traveling at supersonic velocity. Maintenance officers calculating repair times begin to factor in not whether an aircraft has been hit, but how many hits it has sustained. A Bf-109 with 50 caliber holes is often more practical to write off than to repair, as the small diameter punctures damage internal structures without creating obvious external failure points. Control cables are severed, hydraulic lines are perforated, electrical systems are compromised. The Thunderbolt's firepower creates a new category of combat damage, aircraft that are technically flyable but economically irreparable, machines that limp back to base only to be cannibalized for parts because the labor hours required to restore them to airworthy status exceed the labor hours required to build a new aircraft. This is yet another advantage that abundance provides. Even when German pilots successfully damage American fighters, they often do so in ways that the American industrial system can absorb and remedy faster than the Luftwaffe can exploit the tactical victory. As 1944 dawns, the P-47 Thunderbolt has been joined by the P-51 Mustang in the skies over Europe, but it is the Thunderbolt that remains the symbol of American air power, the aircraft that Luftwaffe pilots respect and fear most. The Mustang is more elegant, longer ranged, perhaps more deadly in the hands of a skilled pilot. But the P-47 represents something that transcends mere effectiveness. It represents the philosophy that will ultimately win the war. It is heavy where it should be light, crude where it should be refined, expensive where it should be, economical, and none of that matters, because the nation that built it has the industrial capacity to render traditional engineering constraints meaningless. 8. 50 caliber machine guns, 3,400 rounds of ammunition. A pilot who can fire for 30 seconds without pause, who can spray the sky with lead, who fights with the confidence of a man who knows that even if he fails, even if he is shot down, the factory back home will produce another aircraft, Another pilot will be trained. Another load of ammunition will be manufactured and shipped to England. The P-47 is not just a fighter aircraft. It is a message written in steel and gunpowder. America has arrived, and America fights not with elegant precision, but with overwhelming force, not with careful conservation, but with abundant expenditure, not with the mindset of a nation that might lose, but with the confidence of a nation that has already calculated the end point and is simply working through the necessary steps to reach it. Heinrich Müller survives the war. He logs over 2,000 combat hours, achieves 44 confirmed victories, earns the Knight's Cross. He is shot down twice, wounded 3 times, and on one of those occasions, it is a P-47 that shoots him down a burst of fire so sustained and accurate that it severs his Bf-109's left aileron control cable, perforates his coolant system, and punches 3 rounds through his cockpit canopy, one of them grazing his shoulder. In the seconds before he bails out, as his aircraft begins its uncontrolled spin toward the Earth, Müller can hear the sound of the Thunderbolt's guns still firing, the American pilot making certain of the kill, expending another 100 rounds on an aircraft that is already finished. It is this detail that Müller remembers most clearly in the years after the war. Not the fear, not the pain of his wound, but the sound of those guns continuing to fire, the mechanical certainty of it. The message implicit in that expenditure of ammunition, that the pilot who shot him down could afford to waste bullets on a target that was already destroyed, that the system which produced those bullets, and that aircraft, and that pilot, operated at a scale where such waste was not merely acceptable, but was barely even noticed. In the archives of the Bundesarchiv in Freiburg, there are thousands of pages of Luftwaffe combat reports from the period 1943 to 1945. In these reports, compiled by men who knew they were losing, who watched their staffels shrink from 18 aircraft to 12 to 8 to 4, who said goodbye to friends who did not return, there is a recurring phrase that appears with increasing frequency: intensive defensive fire from escort fighters. This is the bureaucratic language for what Heinrich Müller experienced that January morning in 1943. The clinical terminology for what happens when industrial abundance meets tactical desperation. Intensive defensive fire. 8 machine guns firing at 100 rounds per second. The sound of an anti-aircraft battery concentrated into a single-seat fighter aircraft. The visible manifestation of a democracy that has chosen to prosecute warfare not through martial excellence or tactical innovation, but through the simple expedient of bringing more resources to bear than the enemy can possibly match. The P-47 Thunderbolts 8 50 caliber machine guns did not win the air war over Europe by themselves. That victory was the product of thousands of factors, from code breaking to strategic planning to individual courage. But those 8 guns, and the 3,400 rounds they carried, represented a truth that ultimately proved more powerful than any tactical doctrine or engineering elegance. That in modern industrial warfare, abundance is its own form of superiority. That the nation which can afford to waste resources is the nation that will ultimately prevail, and that freedom, whatever its other virtues or flaws, generates an economic engine that authoritarian systems cannot match and cannot defeat. The sun sets over the Ruhr Valley. The sky is empty now, save for the contrails slowly dissipating in the thin air at 30,000 feet, the only evidence that moments ago this space was filled with machines and men engaged in the ancient work of trying to kill each other. Somewhere below, in a factory that has somehow survived 4 years of bombing, workers are assembling components for another Messerschmitt, carefully conserving materials, stretching limited resources across unlimited need. And somewhere across the English Channel, in a depot in Kent, armourers are loading belts of 50 caliber ammunition into the wings of another P-47 Thunderbolt, working through the night to prepare for tomorrow's mission, handling bullets that will likely never hit their target, that will be fired into empty sky or expended in brief bursts at long range, Because the pilots who will fly those aircraft tomorrow have been trained to shoot first and shoot often, to never worry about ammunition conservation, to fight with the confidence that comes from knowing that back home, right now, in factories operating 3 shifts per day, 7 days per week, other workers are producing more bullets, more aircraft, more of everything, faster than any enemy could possibly destroy it. This is the truth that Heinrich Müller learned in that moment above the Ruhr, the truth that transformed him from a confident ace into a competent survivor, that skill matters, courage matters, but abundance matters more, and that a single machine carrying 8 guns and 3,400 rounds is not merely a weapon, but a statement, a declaration that the age of elegant efficiency has ended and the age of overwhelming force has begun, and that no amount of tactical excellence can overcome the simple mathematics of industrial production when one side has steel to spare and the other has only pride.